There has been a fire reported in the building. Please proceed to the nearest exit and leave the building.
This is just a drill.
Fighting security. That's 19 security. Floor 2 is clear.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to Deciphering My Experience. My name is Eric, and I'm just sitting here drinking my coffee this morning, surfing the internet, digging down into rabbit holes and finding stuff out. And I came across some really bombshell information this morning in regards to ELF and VLF technology. So I suggest you grab a coffee, because I'm gonna read some info to you folks. I will have the links for everything that I'm going to be reading will be in the comments down below. So if you're one of those people that doesn't like to be read to and wants to read it yourself, by all means, shut the video off, go to the links, read everything that I'm about to present, and make up your mind on the topic matter by all means. But if there are those of you that would like to hear my thoughts on the topic, I'm going to go through this pretty much word for word and apply some input to what's going on. So I'm going to get started with the IRVA, the International Remote Viewing Association website. I'll be putting a link to that. And they have listed here a person on this website. It goes by the name of Marcia Adams. This is a public page. It says here, as an integrator of multiple scientific disciplines, Marcia Adams has proposed pioneering authoring or co-authoring papers that have changed paradigms. While at Stanford Medical School, she was involved in electrophysiological measurements. She participated with the surgical team that launched the popularity of coronary bypass surgery. She devised an electronic circuit that allows cardiac pacemakers to fine-tune the amount of electricity needed to pace the heart. In the late 1970s, she pioneered the idea that impending earthquakes may produce low-frequency electromagnetic signals that may explain anomalous animal behavior, and that monitoring these signals may lead to earthquake forecasting. Anomalous behaviors. We hear that term sometimes, anomalous. To that end, she constructed the first civilian station to monitor low-frequency signals for the purpose of earthquake forecasting. She has done extensive analysis correlating solar terrestrial data with health and crime statistics. While employed by SRI International as a senior computer systems analyst in the early 1980s, she participated in the remote viewing project. She functioned as both a researcher and trainee under the tutelage of Ingo Swann. Adams pioneered the idea that RV performance may be influenced by prevailing geomagnetic conditions. She authored 2 papers showing a temporal relationship between remote viewing quality and geomagnetic field activity. Although she has not been active in remote viewing since the mid-1980s, her current research activities include measuring geophysical variables endeavoring to understand the Earth-like phenomenon. This research may be relevant to understanding subtle environmental variables and improving RV results. It lists here from a convention in 2012, I believe, the topic being, should location, environment, and time be considered variables in remote viewing performance? This is the abstract from this talk. It says, Marcia Adams will describe her participation in the SRI remote viewing project in the early 1980s as both researcher and trainee. She will show a brief video explaining the relevant mechanism for the research she did. Naturally occurring electric and magnetic activity of the Earth and its source, solar activity. Research that may link solar terrestrial activity to human physiology and remote viewing quality will be discussed. She will review 2 papers she presented at the Parapsychological Association meeting in the mid-1980s regarding temporal relationships of Dr. Hal Puthoff's remote viewing data to geomagnetic field activity. Gravity waves? I wonder. Expanding the scope, recent research regarding physiological and health changes induced by both naturally occurring and artificial electric and magnetic fields will be explored. She will discuss measurable characteristics of location, including data collection in the ambient environment inside buildings, at sacred sites, at so-called geopathetic zones. I believe those are the areas that Tesla was referring to, the ability to do energy work being easier at certain locations. Geopathetic zones, I believe, is the title she's using. And in control areas. Speculations about environmental effects on physiology and therefore remote viewing performance will be made. Adams will discuss how local fields can be detected and measured directly, as well as how to find links to real-time internet data for naturally occurring solar terrestrial data. Adams will also speculate on some potentially fruitful areas to explore for temporal relationships with RV results, as well as some possible mitigation measures. It's a very interesting person. M. Adams. I found this other page, which will also be linked. It says this. Adams belongs to the Society for Scientific Exploration. She is a biologist and worked in computers and research at SRI International. She has also performed medical research at Stanford Medical School and founded the Time Research Institute in the San Francisco Bay Area to do earthquake forecasting using low-frequency electromagnetic signals. This is a quote. While doing earthquake forecasting research, I found that the human body can be very sensitive to these forces. It acts like an antenna and can be a conduit, Adams said. Our body will react in a variety of ways, like a feeling of being unwell, dizziness, irritability, headaches, but mostly fatigue. You don't say. Coincidentally, these symptoms share some commonality with symptoms reported to be produced by geopathetic zones, she said. Of course, these symptoms can be caused by other factors, but geopathetic zone exposure is a culprit to be considered, Adams said. Very interesting. Those would be the symptoms of what some people would say are directed energy weapons. With that being said, I was digging around on the internet this morning, as I stated earlier. Links will be below. And I came across some SRI International paperwork, which seems to support this idea of ELF and human interactions. So let's dig into this. 6600 sub 5 ELF/RV correlation study. This is good, folks. You are going to dig this. This makes a lot of connections. Those were just blanks. So again, it's funny when you dig through this information to even see how it's presented. There's great info in here, but this is still very limited hangout of what happened, because I just went through that headline and a few blank pages, and you can see as presented, it shows up, here we are, section 15 and 16, end of year sponsor evaluation and recommendation for follow-on project, sponsor and contractor. That's what it says there. Attachment 1. With regard to RV, remote viewing, jamming / ambient ELF, SRI International will provide the appropriate equipment, facilities, and personnel to accomplish the following tasks. Search and summarize the literature that indicates that geomagnetic storm activity and other factors that produce fluctuations in the ambient ELF bands greater than 300 Hz can degrade psychoenergetic performance. 2. Construct an ELF detector that can monitor ambient ELF fluctuations in the local RV chamber. 3. Examine the statistical correlations between RV performance on an appropriate series of trials carried out in the RV chamber and the ambient ELF fluctuations to determine whether measurement of ambient ELF can be used as an indicator of expected performance and whether optimum performance windows can be identified. They seem to have a goal. Statement of problem. The ELF/RV correlation study task is directed toward determining whether correlation exists between high-quality remote viewing and the occurrence of certain geophysical conditions such as EM storm activity, solar flare activity, lightning strike activity, etc. There's a bibliography right here. The Geomagnetic Field in Life by Plenum Press, New York, 1978, A. Dubrov. Tissue Interactions with Non-Ionizing EM Fields, Physiological Reviews, Volume 61, Number 2, April 1981, W.R. a day. Planned experiments. 1. General. The objective of this effort is to investigate the possible effects of ambient geophysical / low-frequency electromagnetic ELF factors on RV performance. Major goals. Phase 1. Search and summarize the literature on geophysical ELF effects on biological organisms, especially as they relate to the degradation of human performance skills at a behavioral level. Listen to that one again. Phase 2. Examine the statistical correlation between RV performance in the historical SRI RV database and the ambient geophysical ELF factors. Well, that speaks a mouthful right there. Apparently this isn't a new program at the time of writing this. Phase 3. Explore the statistical correlation between RV performance and ambient ELF fluctuations. Specifically on the basis of real-time ELF monitoring. Phase 4. Provide an evaluation report as to whether measurement of ambient geophysical ELF factors can be used as an indicator of expected RV performance and whether optimum performance windows can be identified. 2. Specific tasks. SRI International will conduct a literature search to collect and summarize up-to-date knowledge in the field of bioelectronics. The literature search will be carried out in the following categories. Bioactive frequencies for ELF/VLF at the gross anatomical and behavioral levels, effects of VLF frequencies at the biochemical, hormonal, ionic, molecular levels, effects of ELF/VLF at the neuronal membrane level, natural sources of ELF/VLF, man-made sources of ELF/VLF, artificial generation of ELF/VLF. This is really, this is kind of the stuff that I've been alluding to for quite some time and suggesting that these programs would be dealing with, that there is the potential for these technologies to be functioning with and or against organics. And apparently this is the connection between some of the different programs is right here in this paperwork. So, more things they were looking to do. Propagation characteristics of ELF, VLF. Detection measurement of ELF and VLF. This will be accomplished by means of both references to literature on hand and by computerized keyword searches. Additionally, the SRI International Consultant will contact Dr. William D. Schul, Olive W. Garvey Center for the Improvement of Human Functioning, Wichita, Kansas. SRI International will perform an analysis to determine whether correlations exist between RV performance in historical data, data from previous experiments, and factors in the ambient geophysical environment. Data from previous studies conducted under controlled conditions will be analyzed by means of epoch, bivariate, and multivariate analysis when possible against the following geophysical variables: weather, temperature, relative humidity, barometric pressure, and so forth. Geomagnetic indices, solar electromagnetic emissions, sunspot number, ionospheric conditions, solar magnetic field, and lunar cycles. Further, because it is hypothesized that the mechanism by which geophysical factors could play a role in RV performance is that of changing the ambient ELF environment, SRI International will examine this hypothesis as well. An ELF database spanning a year and a half from May 1982 to present was monitored by a field station in Los Altos, California. Data were taken twice daily. The same analysis techniques used for the geophysical analysis will be applied to the ELF data. Positive results from these tasks could yield a rough index of expected RV performance, given prevailing geophysical factors. SRI International will implement a program of real-time ELF monitoring. Little information is available on the variation of the ELF environment from location to location, although it is known that ELF frequencies generated by geophysical means tend to vary simultaneously over the globe. Therefore, local variations may exist that are caused by both man-made sources and by the geological structure of the areas. For this reason, 2 ELF stations will be set up, one at the SRI premises in the RV laboratory, the other at a field station 17 kilometers distant. Data from the SRI station will be compared with the field station data to determine variability attributable to location and distance. This comparison may also help determine whether RV performance is influenced, global, local, or both sources of ELF disturbances. Particular attention will be paid to bioactive frequencies found as a result of the literature search in Task 1. Statistical correlations will be sought between the RV performance on an appropriate series of trials carried out in the RV chamber and the ambient ELF fluctuations in order to determine whether measurement of ambient ELF can be used as an indicator of expected performance and whether optimum performance windows can be identified. Lots of ELF, lots of transmitting. This was written a long time ago. Funding was received for this task on 15 November, so if this is written a year and a half after they mentioned 82 earlier, so we got a ballpark time frame. This is where it gets interesting. As if the other stuff wasn't, right? Discussions were held with R. Leonard with regard to individuals within the radio physics laboratory and among SRI consultants who will cooperate in carrying out this task. The first efforts on this task are to begin 6 December with a meeting with the primary consultant. Ready? Drum roll. Marcia Adams. Interesting. Thought she was into earthquakes. Project Director Putoff and subcontractor M. Adams of Time Research Institute. If I remember correctly, M. Adams started that. M. Adams of Time Research Institute worked out the details of an overall plan and a work statement to carry out the ELF task. See attached subcontract. Don't have that yet. Representative Atwater, that's a big name, was briefed on 19 January during a site visit to the Menlo Park facility as to the progress on this task. Several task sub-elements have been activated, such as arranging for SRI Burroughs computer programs to be reformatted for the IBM XT to be used on project, ordering of equipment, literature search, initial ELF measurements at the Los Altos subcontractor facility, etc. Meanwhile, all RV data gathered on the various tasks are keyed as to date and time of day for later correlation against geophysical variable measurement. Bam! Next 5 pages in document exempt, so we don't get to see those. But that is basically a lot for people to consider. I keep pumping that I feel like there's some technology at hand that people may not be familiar with yet. I keep suggesting that these projects have been working on these things for decades. And here we have some solid connections and some evidence that the Stargate program, the stuff that I've released previously about participants being in these programs knowingly and unknowingly, that these programs have been working with children. People have come forth about that, myself included, that the Stargate program, temporal programs, and SRI, and people are still doing these things. So let's learn more about ELF. See if we can figure out where these facilities are, what types of vehicles might function with ELF capacity. So I guess locations, vehicles, systems. Let's start this conversation about ELF. I think the ball has been dropped on this. What do you guys know about ELF? And if you have any questions, just reach out, let me know, throw them in the comments, or as always, you can email me at decipheringme369@gmail.com. I've been getting a lot of interactions lately. I really enjoy the questions and the support. So let's do this. Let's talk more, and let's see if we can drum up some conversation about ELF. And I almost forgot. I had a couple of books here that I would want to recommend as well. Bilderberg Group by Daniel Eustelin, I believe is how you say his name. That's a really good book. That's a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff and a bunch of connections. You guys will dig it. And then this one here, since we were kind of discussing the topic at hand and, you know, digging through CIA files and Stargate stuff, this book is called Class 11. And it's a very insightful book on how some CIA operations work in the training process. So I think you guys might like this one as well. But that's about it. I really appreciate you guys joining me today. I recommend that you take a look at those links, download them, hold on to them, because things like this can disappear. Just because we have access to them now doesn't mean that they'll be around forever. So I like to print stuff off. I recommend you guys get some hard copies of things as well, like books. But have an excellent afternoon, and I hope to talk to you guys again sometime soon. Have a great day.